And I'd like to call Mr. Glenn Mahone to introduce the speaker. Mr. Mahone is the Vice President in Communications for Aerojet Rocketdyne. Aerojet Rocketdyne is a company that builds engines, motors, and propulsion systems for rockets, space exploration, and missiles. We're extremely honored to have Mr. Mahone and Aerojet Rocketdyne continue their support. Without them, this conference could not go on as it is happening today. Mr. Mahone.
I have the distinct honor and privilege today to introduce a very, very, very good friend of mine. Not only is he a friend, but he is also a fraternity brother. Prior to going to work at Aerojet Rocketdyne, I worked at NASA, and I had the honor to serve at NASA as the Associate Administrator for Public Affairs and Communications, with an emphasis on strategic opportunities and strategic communications. I worked with the gentleman that I'm going to introduce, and needless to say, he has always been an inspiration to me, and he inspires and has always inspired young people and has had that interest in making sure that the next generation was a generation of explorers and a generation of people who could have an opportunity to go to the next level. And I'm not particularly speaking of the next level here on Earth. I'm talking about the next level outside of what we see and what we do on a daily basis. It's difficult for me to call him Colonel because I've always called him Fred. But I'm going to deviate today, and I'm going to call him Colonel. Because when you have been in the military, you afford that continuation of what your title is. Colonel Gregory was the first American or African American to pilot an American space shuttle when he led the Challenger on a 7-day mission in 1985. And if you know your history about space and space travel, Challenger was one of the mishaps that we had in our space program. Colonel Gregory was a decorated helicopter pilot during the Vietnam War and a jet test pilot. He has flown literally everything from helicopters and gliders to jet fighters and spacecrafts. After being a test pilot, Colonel Gregory decided that he wanted to be an astronaut, which was a dream he had and held since he was a teenager. And as I look around this room, I'm going to challenge many of the young people here to also strive for the achievement that Colonel Gregory achieved. Colonel Gregory had a very illustrious career as an astronaut in which he spent more than 455 hours in outer space, and he commanded 3 major space missions from 1985 to 1991. Later in his career, from 2002 to 2005, Colonel Gregory held the second highest administration position as the Deputy Administrator with NASA, which was an appointment by then U.S. President George W. Bush. For a period of that time, Colonel Gregory was the first African American to lead NASA in his role as acting administrator. And let me say that again, the first African American administrator at NASA. Originally from Washington, D.C., Colonel Gregory is a graduate of Anacostia High School, was the only African American in the U.S. Air Force Academy, and later completed a master's degree from George Washington University in Information Systems. Colonel Gregory's list of accomplishments is vast and extremely impressive. And I'm not going to stand here today and take away from him and try to give you, but the list goes on and on and on. And he is still making accomplishments. And we're very, very fortunate. Please join me in an extremely warm welcome to Colonel Frederick Gregory.
And no nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind in this race for space.
I have a dream that my poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Well, I say to them tonight, there is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America. There is not a black America and a white America and Latino America and Asian America. There's the United States of America.
Good morning, good morning. Holy cow, look up there. I always like to show this right here. I introduce the upper left one as my grandson. His father's next to him and I'm down at the bottom. Or either that or that's the way I looked when I got on the space shuttle and the bottom was the way I looked when I got back. Now, let's see if I can figure out all this stuff. Laptop. I assume this is, okay. This is a great opportunity for me because it is a chance for me to tell you why I'm worthy of being here today. And I'm going to tell you a story, and the story is going to talk, it's a very personal story about me, my family, my goals, and it will actually dispute one of the things that my friend Glenn Mahone said, but I'll correct him. I've been able to do that a couple of times, as he has been able to do that for me in the early days. But the first thing I want to tell you is that I am bona fide to be here. If you look at that picture up there, look the second one from the right, that's me. I got that suit from eBay. The rest of the people in the photograph were all photoshopped in there. I have no idea who those people are. But this is actually my first command, and we're getting ready to get in that pointy thing out there, which is the orbiter Discovery. I'll tell you a little bit about space flight, but not at this point. I had a mentor growing up, and everybody here needs to have a mentor. It's not a person who is necessarily technically capable of telling you what you ought to do in your career. It is a person who will listen to you. And sometimes that's what you need. You need somebody who you can talk to. Well, here is mine. That's my dad right there. My dad did not know the word no. If I asked him if I could do something, his first response was yes. And he would wait for me to prove to him his answer should have been no. But he would always say yes. My dad grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, among other places. His father was a college-level professor, as was his father, a college-level professor. And so you can tell that there were already expectations in the family for the follow-on generations. My dad went to engineering school in Cleveland, a place called Case Institute, It's called Case Western Reserve at this point. 1928, when he graduated, and he was accepted at MIT. He was an electrical engineer, but he didn't have enough money to go to MIT, and so he spent 2 years instructing, once at Tuskegee and the other at North Carolina A&T. But he also had another very interesting role, and I can talk to you all about it, but none of you all are really old enough to understand. In the 20s, we had something called Prohibition in America. And that was a period of time, if you look back, when more alcohol was consumed than before Prohibition or after Prohibition. Alcohol was not produced in America and came in over the border, Canada. There were ships anchored off the east coast and west coast of America, from Mexico, South America. Well, they needed people to transport this alcohol from Canada into Cleveland, which is what my dad did. Now, so I am not going to defend what he did, but he did do what was necessary to achieve this next level, which was to go to MIT. And so he finished MIT in 1932, achieving a master's degree in electrical engineering. Now, he was a tennis player. He loved tennis. And I grew up in Washington, D.C., in Southeast D.C., and we would have friends. He would have friends over at the house all the time. And I, as a 5-year-older, and everybody can remember when they were 5-year-olders, I would sit at these folks' feet and listen to them as they talked about their wins and losses and the competition and the excitement of it. And I think my dad, at a very early age, anticipated that I would play tennis. And here I am with him, right here. This is probably the first and last time I ever had a tennis racket in my hand. But he also had a lot of friends who were pilots. And I sat and listened to these guys, and these guys were so enthusiastic about what they had done. And it was clear to me that these were not ordinary pilots. These were fighter pilots. These are guys who had participated in the Second World War. And I just at 5 years old, I decided that's what I really would like to do when I grew up. One of them offered to take me for a flight in his airplane. And my dad, of course, said yes. And so we headed across into Maryland, not far from my house. And they put me in this airplane. It's called a Loscom. I'm 5 years old. If you, as a 5-year-old, are sitting in that seat in the front, you can't see through the window. And so they brought Yellow Pages books with them. You all have no idea what Yellow Pages books are. This is back in the old days. You know, when telephones were connected to the wall and you dialed them. Well, we had to have a book of information. And the book of information, if we wanted to find Joe Bag of Donuts, it was in the white pages with the name and addresses and the phone numbers. If you wanted to find commercial, like Home Depot, you look in the yellow pages. Well, in D.C., these books were about this size. With two of them on that seat, I sat on it, I could see through the window. So that's what they did. I'm in the front seat. The pilot is getting in the back seat. And as he's strapping in, there's a rapping on the side of the airplane. And outside is my mother, who is doing this. And we know that is not the universal sign of approval. And she's yelling, "You will not take off with a son in this airplane." 5 years old. My father had given me permission to fly. At 5, I realized that even though my father had given me permission, my mother ruled. So advice for young men: your mother rules, your girlfriend rules, your wife rules. And if you do not understand that, you'd better learn it very quickly. My first flight, by the way, was a taxi around the runway. My dad also enjoyed fast cars. And you all know Andrews Air Force Base is just across the border, well, from me in DC. There were sometimes sports car racing at Andrews. And it was allowed by a general. His name was Curtis LeMay, General LeMay. And we would lie, my dad and I would lie on a hillside, and we would watch and listen to these sports cars. I learned that the most beautiful sound in the world is a Ferrari as it shifts down into a turn and then out. And if you've never heard a Ferrari, do that. You will discover it is the most beautiful sound in the world. In those days, you can actually walk across the runways and walk onto the ramps. And on those ramps were airplanes. And airplanes, you could walk up and touch them. And you could talk to the pilots. Well, it was during that time that I learned that the greatest smell in the world was aviation fuel. And so now I knew what the greatest sound was and the greatest smell was. Now, I am like 6 years old, 7 years old, and see, without any direct attempt to focus me on something, man, I was learning fast. Both my mom and dad were teachers. My dad at the high school level, my mom in elementary school, 4th, 5th, and 6th grades. But they realized at a very early age that you learned a lot in class, but you learned a lot more by being free and able to roam. And so at the age of 7, I went off to camp in Massachusetts. I'm the far right above the target, right there, the curly head kid. 7 years old, I went, and I stayed at this camp for 7 weeks. Now, people say, oh, that's child abuse. My parents would have been called roaming or something. I don't know what they call them now. 7 weeks. It's interesting because when I was growing up, I never wore a helmet when I rode my bicycle. I did not have a seatbelt in a car. I never ate anything that said organic or natural on it. I have no idea how I survived all of these years. At 8, I went back to the same camp, and I stayed 8 weeks. Now, my mother, being a school teacher, knew that I would never be able to stay there at this camp. She knew I would want to come home and study with her all summer. She gave me a penny postcard, and if you didn't know what yellow pages are, you'd have no idea what a penny postcard is. But it's just a postcard. And on it, it said, "Come get me." And it was addressed to her. I still have those cards, by the way. Well, I was a Boy Scout. And I was a Cub Scout and a Boy Scout. And I spent a lot of time camping and learning. At 11, I went from Washington, D.C. to California on a train. You know what they are? Trains? Okay, trains. At 11. And I'm out there with 50,000 young Boy Scouts from all over the world, some from Brussels, in fact. I met a guy out there. A guy's name was Walt Disney. And he told me personally that he was going to build an amusement park in California. I don't know if he ever did that or not, but it was an exciting time for me. At 12 and 13, I went with the Boy Scouts to a wilderness camp in northern New Mexico. By the time I was 13, I had seen most of the United States, and I had done it without parental supervision. And so I had the sense of adventure when I was so very young to do these things that at this point you'd call out of the box, but they weren't out of the box at that time. Now, I continued going to Andrews, and I would go out there to the air shows, and I saw this Air Force flying demonstration group called the Thunderbirds. This is the time at that time. And I decided at an early age that that's what I wanted to do, be a Thunderbird pilot. So I asked one of the pilots, how can I become a pilot as a Thunderbird pilot? And he said, they are building a school in Colorado at the foot of Pikes Peak. You should go there. Well, I'd been to Pikes Peak as a Boy Scout. And so I decided at that age, based on the adventures that I'd had, to go to that school. Well, that's where I went, the Air Force Academy. It was brand new when I went there. I entered in the summer of 1960. The first class that graduated from that school had graduated just a year before. So I was in the 6th graduating class from the Air Force Academy. I tell you that because my grandson was in the 53rd graduating class, and his sister was in the 54th graduating class from this school. I went there thinking it was a flying school. And then when I got there, I realized they didn't have any airplanes. And it was an academic, it was a university. Well, I grew up in D.C., went to Anacostia, as Mr. Mahone had said, and I was kind of prepared. But let me tell you, when you get out there, if you think you're kind of prepared, then you're just average when you get out there. But I did graduate with an engineering degree in aeronautics. My minor was classical English. And so at a very early age, I had no idea what I was going to do. The school had about 60% engineering or STEM courses, as we'd call them now. 40% was what we would consider liberal arts. And I can remember while I was at the school, I was curious, why am I spending all of this time learning economics, political science, history, law, English? Why am I learning this? Well, I didn't realize how important that was until maybe 4 or 5 years later. So it's important when you get your education that it's certainly great to focus, but you've got to be diverse in the things that you learn. So I graduated from this school, and I decided there that, I really didn't really want to be a fighter pilot and fly Thunderbirds. I wanted to fly helicopters. Well, I had 490 classmates. 489 of them harassed me. You're going to be a helicopter pilot. We're going to be fighter pilots. Well, that didn't bother me. Well, here I am for graduation. Now, the interesting thing here is I am shaking hands with General Curtis E. LeMay, who is the one who authorized sports car racing when I was 7 or 8. We are talking about sports car racing as I am graduating from that place. And so one of the things you're going to realize is that you're going to meet people early in life, and it's going to circle around, and years later, you're going to meet them again. And so one of the things you should never, ever do is burn bridges, because those folks are going to help you. Okay, so now I am graduated. I marry a young lady who on our first date I had taken to an air show. I wanted to take her to a nice place, so I took her to Vietnam. Actually, that's not right. I became a helicopter pilot. And my first assignment was into Vietnam as a rescue pilot, and this is one of my rescues. I am the pilot up there as we're pulling people from a wreck or something. I can't remember exactly what it was. But it's fascinating because I picked up 3 of my classmates. One of them was so just overwhelmed by this experience that he went back and became a helicopter pilot. So the whole attitude about fighter pilot, helicopter pilot ended immediately. And you're going to find that you might decide, or you might have people who are your peers will harass you or belittle you for making a decision. You're going to be so surprised how some of those decisions you make when you're young will help you in your next set of steps. So I came back to the States and I flew this Huey. I show you that because my grandson right now is flying Hueys just like this at Andrews, and that's a couple of decades apart. But when I came back, I realized, I had better start deciding what I want to do when I grow up. I have no idea. Every morning I get up. I go to the flight line. I'd get briefed on what I was supposed to do. I'd fly. I'd come home in the evening. I'd get up the next morning. I'd go to work. They'd brief me. I'd fly, and I'd come home. Every day, the same thing, over and over again. This is what you call a rut. And you're not doing it because you love it. You're doing it because you are supposed to do it. And so I decided at this early age, it's still early for me, that what I wanted to do in life was have fun and make a contribution. Not or, both of them. And when fun disappeared, it was time to change. And that's something you can do in your life. You can change things. I found out that based on my education in flying time, I could apply to something called test pilot school. Very difficult school. One is down in Maryland in Lexington Park, St. Mary's County. The other is the Air Force out at Edwardson, California. So I applied because I wasn't having fun anymore. Well, the Air Force came back independent of my application and said, we're going to train you as a fixed-wing pilot. It's a person whose wings don't move. And you get your choice of airplanes. So I said, okay, I'm going to play that game. I'll do that. And so they sent me back to pilot training, and I got to check out in this little white airplane. You talk about a sports car. This makes a Ferrari, sit in envy. And then I went to this airplane, which was the F-4, which was a principal fighter during the Vietnam era for the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines, and many international countries. And people have asked me, I'm in the front seat in that one, by the way. I didn't sit in the back for nobody. People have asked me, was it difficult to transition from helicopters to fighters? And I said, well, helicopters go 90 miles an hour. Fighters go 900 miles an hour. All you do is add a zero. That's it. So now I'm an F-4 pilot. Now I can become a Thunderbird pilot. Then the Air Force comes and says, we're going to send you to test pilot school. I'd forgotten completely about that. And we're going to send you to the Navy school. By the way, the Navy school is where Air Force folks would go if they were helicopter pilots. So I had to think about this decision. So I got one of these airplanes, and I flew it from Arizona to Maryland, the school, parked it, and walked in. I met the skipper, Commander Sample. And I said, you see that airplane? He says, yep. I said, I flew it. He said, yep. I said, I'm coming to school. He said, yep, as a helicopter pilot. And I said, let's talk about this. So I said, can I do both the helicopter and the fighter course? And he started laughing. He said, nobody's ever done that before. And I said, well, can I do it? And he said, if you're stupid, if you really want to do it, then we'll let you do it. So I did, and let me tell you, it was the worst mistake I ever made in my entire life. If I wanted to watch a football game on Sunday, the week before I had to begin the time management so that on Sunday I had 3 hours out here. Now, this is all, as Mrs. Obama was saying, it's all here. Sometimes this is the stupid thing, but this is the thing that keeps you going right here. I graduated, and here I am with a fighter-type airplane and a helicopter pilot. You'll never see that again. I think I was the one and only person ever to do both the rotary and fixed-wing course. What you can't see is that I haven't slept for 3 months. You can't see that in the face. So now I'm a test pilot, and I'm flying for the Air Force, at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. Now, in the first group, now up to this point, we had had 72 white guys in the astronaut program, no women. After this selection, this is what we had. We had a very diverse group. In fact, if you compare that to what NASA looked like in those days, this is revolutionary. If you see the triangle in the back, if you come down the right side of the triangle, that's me right there. But in this group is Sally Ride. She's on the front row with the white turtleneck sweater. In this group is the first African American to fly in space, Guy Bluford, top row, far left. Much of the Challenger crew is in this group right here. 15 pilots, 20 mission specialists. The interesting thing, if you ask them, any one of them, how did you get here? The first thing they would say is, I know 15 or 20 people better qualified than I am. Everybody's a type A in this group. There was not an ego in this group. The most humble group of people. But if you look at their backgrounds, you're going to see backgrounds similar to me. Not just the academic, but it's those other things that Sally was a tennis player. I mean, we had people who were mountain climbers. And so, you know, you could be all or equal. Some are more equal than others, and those are the other things that you did. I mean, I played baseball, football. I mean, I was a water skier, but that was just something I do. But when they began looking at who are you going to select, they're looking for a person who has a background, who's able to assess risk and make decisions based on it. Okay, so now I'm an astronaut. So I'm still not going to be a Thunderbird pilot, you know. Okay, so during that time, I had an opportunity to meet another gentleman, and I presented him with a trophy. That's the Brewer Trophy. That is Chief Anderson right here, who I had shown you earlier. did. Walked away and have never flown an airplane since. And so you talk about I do whatever I want.